Yep, cool. Hey, Sam.
Nice to meet you.
Where am I going?
We're just in the middle. We're good.
Cool.
All right.
Hi, I'm Rachel.
Rachel. Okay,
So
cool.
we're live on YouTube. So
Are we
I'm just
live
gonna
now?
I'm just gonna give an introduction and then we'll get straight into the conversation. Nice to meet
Okay,
you.
cool.
All right. Hello, guys. Welcome to the Summer Ray podcast. Today we find ourselves here live at the Reconnect conference, and the event is happening at the Vitality Sports Stadium. And honestly, I count myself lucky to be part of this event. It's a really, really great event. And yeah, we are happy to be coming straight to you live from the Vitality Sports Stadium. So it's me here, Sam, and
Rachel.
the usual Ray. And today we have a very, very interesting guest, and we're lucky to have him as our first guest for today. And he is the keynote speaker for the event for today. He goes by the name Kevlin Henney. Let's give him a round of applause.
Oh, thank you very much.
Kevlin, welcome to the Summer Ray podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
How are you doing?
How are you doing today?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed your session that you just had. Very relatable, and I have questions for you. But
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, no, it was good fun. It was good fun doing that. Yeah.
Okay. Have you been to Bournemouth before? Is this your first time?
I have been to Bournemouth before, but I'm struggling to remember when I was last here. It was pre-pandemic.
Because I realized you went to university in Bristol.
I did,
which is not too far.
Which is not too far.
Yeah.
Yeah. Distance-wise, but it takes a surprising amount of time to drive.
Yeah. About 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it was closer to 2 hours.
Close to
2 hours,
yeah.
2.25 hours, but yeah.
All right. So today we don't want to go too technical with you because you've had your session with everybody, speaking everything about software development and all of that. So we just want to get to know who Kevlin is.
Oh, okay.
So, do you mind telling us how your upbringing was to becoming who you are today? Because I know you are a lot of things. You're a speaker, you're an author. When I saw some of the books that you co-wrote, I was like, wow. So, what was your upbringing like?
Yeah. Okay, so there was no plan. So, so I live in Bristol. I went to university in Bristol, but I think as a kid I thought I was going to, well, obviously as a child I wanted to be an astronaut because who doesn't?
So you were really smart then?
Well, no, I've been smart. I said I don't want to be an astronaut, but I wanted to be an astronaut. But then I kind of adjacent to that is like astronomy. I thought, I want to be an astronomer. I want to go, and I thought, that means I want to go into physics. And this is where I thought I wanted to go.
Okay.
So I kind of took a very traditional kind of sciencey kind of track.
Right.
And I ended up doing physics at university. And when I got to university, and I'd taken a gap year, because I was quite young. So it's like, okay, I'll take a gap year. And it's kind of, I didn't realise it, but during the gap year, it's just like, you know what, I'm not sure I want to do physics. So I worked for British Telecom in that period, and it was a small part of the business, and I worked in lots of different roles, and it was just a very different kind of thing. And yeah, I kind of bumbled along with physics. I still have an interest in physics, but I kind of realised that's not really the thing I want to do. I found myself being much more interested in computers and philosophy and stuff. And as a teenager, I kind of played around with computers a lot. I thought this is kind of good, but I had no idea of like computing as a proper job. And it's only when I rolled off the other end of my degree, I was just like, honestly, I had no idea what I'm going to do. So I was just temping. I had no idea. And a friend of mine, she did physics with me, and she said, I went for this interview for a job. It's a job doing software development. And she said, I don't think it's going to be me, but I think it might be you. And I said, yeah, okay. So I applied and I got the job and never looked back. And it was just that whole thing of, at that point, I started really kind of learning about, okay, this is software development not as a hobby, but actually in the context of a business.
Yeah.
But also my boss had this amazing bookshelf of books, none of which were relevant to what we did. They're all like deep computer science and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it was a case of like, oh, these are interesting. And this is the point: is that this was new territory to me. This was a foreign land, and I wanted to find out more. So I was just taking books home, reading them, bringing them back, and it was just self-taught computer science. And I just thought, oh my God, there's all these programming languages, these different ways of thinking, and I'd never realised these different ways of thinking. And as a kid, when you're hacking around with some code, you're kind of, if you've got a kind of a group of friends who also do the same thing, you kind of exchange ideas, but mostly it's kind of clever tricks and tips.
Yeah.
You don't talk methodology. You don't talk, and what I discovered is that you hit the wall fairly quickly in terms of how much code can an individual write without any kind of code. You don't know there's paradigms of software design and your modularity and great concept. And I was kind of reading this, it's like learning not only what these were, but that there were different schools of thought. And you're just like, oh, this is fascinating. This is a different, everything's giving you, and so and suddenly that kind of tripped something in me. It's like, oh, I'm interested in structure. This is like really interesting, and this is I can see how this relates to everything. So I found that really interesting, and that kind of pivoted me to, as it were, like, this is what I want to do. I'm really interested in it. But that job, I thought, I think I need to move on from it. I ended up doing a master's degree, also in Bristol, but not the university. Well, I'm old enough that it was Bristol Polytechnic. These days it's University of West of England. And that was in parallel computing. And it was like, for me, it was just like, because I thought, I want to do this because I'm interested in AI. Remember I made the throw remark about philosophy. I was really interested, in my late teens and at university, in philosophy of mind. What does it mean to think? And AI as it was back then, and all of this stuff. And AI was changing. AI was changing. At that point, it changed. This is where neural networks became the thing. And I just started going, that sounds really interesting. This makes a lot more sense.
You're interested in weird stuff.
I like how you're very focused. When you see what you want to do or what interests you, you're like, you make a decision.
At that age, I don't think that was interesting.
No, okay. I'm going to definitely say I'm giving you the older me version of how to tell the story.
Okay.
Honestly, even when I'm saying that's kind of interesting, that was not. I was all over the place because in a sense, I'm looking back and going like, well, I've got nothing better to do. And I was looking, what else shall I do? What next? And this looks interesting, rather than, oh, that's going to be a good career. No, not at all like that. But I thought, oh, this is something that I am. I can focus. But the funny thing is, when I got there, and I thought, parallel computer systems, neural networks. Actually, I got more interested in software engineering. I took a completely different turn and ended up doing my thesis on actually actor-based computing and concurrency models. I kind of went deeper into the programming side and away from. That was my kind of like, that was, these days you talk about deep learning, and like I'd say that neural networks back then was shallow learning. But that was my kind of like, I came in, I did that, I was kind of interested, and then I just thought, oh, that's shiny, and it was just like, and that was a really interesting thing because actually. This was the time when kind of threading was starting to become a thing, multi-threading in terms of operating systems, languages, and all the rest of it. And that background was really helpful. And so so ultimately, rather than going into something that wasn't going to pay, because honestly, if you had knowledge of neural networks back in the early 90s, that's pretty much useless. You can't do anything with that. And so, but that pushed me into, kind of pushed me back into software development, but now I had an even deeper interest in structure, but I also now had some computer science education. And I was kind of really interested in this, like, how do we build stuff? How do we, what are the styles of composition? And generally kind of the problem-solving type of approach. And again, I got interested in languages. I think languages are fascinating. But also the ways of thinking. And around this time, prior to that, I started writing articles. Wow. That turns out to be kind of the thing, and one of the things that I started doing it. Obviously at this point we're all talking about like.
Just a random question. So back in the day, how many books did you used to read in a year for you to generate enough interest to start writing?
I don't know. I was certainly when I was working at that particular company, I was reading a book every 2 weeks. That I would
Wow.
consider. Yeah, I look back at that and I sit there and go like, wow, I can't do that anymore. But kind of, it's a case of you.
And these were all technical books.
They're all technical books. Yeah.
Can I just add that it's much harder? I mean, there are people that still love book, but it's much harder now because we've got like
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
technology,
I was
devices
going to ask
everywhere.
how do you feel about
Compared
that?
to then, there were less distractions.
Genuinely, that actually matters. You're not kidding with that. That genuinely matters. But that became a real central focus. But I would say also I was kind of slightly obsessed with the whole idea. And then in my master's degree, I read a lot of papers and I read more stuff and so on.
Wow.
But I'm going to be absolutely clear. I do not maintain that and have not had that for decades. Let me be really clear
You've done
about
enough
that.
in the past.
But it gave me a real interest in other things which kind of are relevant. It's like, I'm very interested in the history of software development.
Yeah.
And that I think is important because in software we tend to think we don't have a history because it's quite young. It's just like software development is technically now twice as old as it was when I got into it. It does have a history.
True.
And the point is, it's not actually to do with how long the history is, it's to do with the effect. Software runs the planet. It's just like, of course we have a history. And we have traditions, we don't recognise them. And that's the point, is that sometimes when people think, oh yeah, it doesn't have a history, they're thinking of like deep history, they're thinking like, oh yeah, architecture goes back thousands of years, and literature goes back thousands of years, and musical performance goes back thousands of years. It's like, yeah, there's a bunch of things. And then there's a load of other jobs, and software is not unique, that are only decades old. And each of that, we need to acknowledge that a lot of what people do, if you try and sell it to your parents or your grandparents, they don't understand, because that kind of job function or that discipline did not exist.
Yeah.
And all of these things, we can't just look to the old traditions and go, oh, that's properly traditional, or that has a history, and these other things don't. They all have histories. And that for me was really interesting. And so a lot of my knowledge of the history of software comes from this kind of particular period. But also, that idea is that I was also trying to write. I found that I quite enjoyed explaining things, and that turned out to be quite important because I was writing for magazines and user groups, and that ultimately got me a job one place. So to go to a training consultancy company. I kind of got frustrated and upset by company politics with software development. Today I was talking a bit about the pressures of the time pressure. And there's a point. Everybody has a limit in what they're prepared to tolerate. And I just thought, you know what? I want to. How do I change my profession, but without changing my profession, so to speak? How do I change my profession without changing my discipline? When my wife and I went through the same crisis at the same time. We weren't married at that point, but she was a primary school teacher, and I was a software developer. We both went through the crisis at the same time. It's like, how do we change what we're doing? But the thing is, she ended up jumping in eventually into kind of like HR and stuff like that. But that was kind of like, she'd gone all this way up primary school in terms of management and had to kind of hit the reset button. Whereas it was just like, I've got all this software development, I moved sideways. In other words, I was able to use that knowledge, but I'm now using it from a different point of view. I'm training people, I'm mentoring people, I'm visiting teams and helping with their problems. So in that sense, I was very fortunate. I didn't have to do a restart. It's just like, what does it look like? Same knowledge, but using it differently. And I found I really enjoyed that, and that encouraged the article, and then it got me into speaking and stuff like that. And then eventually, kind of subsequent to that, I thought, oh, I'm going to do this on my own.
I just realized we didn't introduce our profession as well. So I'm a product manager, and he's a software developer. So your talk was.
My talk was to both of you.
Oh my god! I was like, you're making sense. I took a lot of pictures and a lot of things. Like I love the whole talk about the clean, good architecture versus bad architecture. Tech debts, oh my god, I haven't worked in any company that has never had tech debts, which they don't manage. From what I understood was, tech debt is okay, but if you manage it, if it's when it's not managed that it becomes a problem.
And so I think that's the important, and that's the point that I try to, technical debt is a very powerful metaphor because and the reason it's powerful,
it's thrown out so easily as well.
Because everybody relates to it at some level. Whereas if I use, let me give you another metaphor that I found really useful. in the early days, and this was kind of before I was aware, in fact, probably even before tech debt was adopted as a term, one of the terms I come across is software entropy or code entropy. And the point is, it made a lot of sense to me, and it also made sense to half of my colleagues because we have physics degrees. And entropy is just like, it's a measure of disorder in a system, and it's just like, it's a measure of disorder, and you have to put work into a system to maintain order. And so for us, it was a very natural kind of language. But the problem is that a metaphor is only as good as its audience. If you're trying to explain something abstract and complex in terms of something that is familiar, that's the whole point of a metaphor. Here's the thing that's abstract and unfamiliar. Let me explain it in terms of something you already know. It's just like, I see there's a mapping. I see that I can take the vocabulary and some of the ideas across. The problem is, if I use a metaphor and you don't understand it, then I have to explain the thing that's going to explain the thing. It's just like, it's not going to work. So the thing is that debt is there are lots of different metaphors. There's no such thing as a perfect metaphor, but one of the things that makes debt accessible and popular is that you hit adult life. You're going to have a notion of debt. You've got a relationship with debt. Well done. Welcome to adulthood. And often it's a negative one, but the point is that's not why the metaphor was introduced. And I made the point there that the subtle thing that people aren't saying, exactly as you picked up on, was it's like many people say, we have tech debt. It's just like, right, but you haven't told me what you're doing with it. And it's the distinction is, are you managing it or is it unmanaged? Yeah, and that's the distinction. It's not whether you have it or not, it's whether it's managed or not. That's the difference. So I gave that example. It's just like, I can't afford to buy a house. When my wife and I, the first place we bought, it was a flat, and it was just like, we couldn't afford to buy that. If you said, give us all the money, no, we can't. That's why mortgages exist. So you've got this kind of idea. And so therefore you've got a clear idea of like, what's the benefit, what's the cost, and how does that play out over time? You have a structured relationship with time, and you have an understanding. It's a genuine trade-off. And so you go, I get it. That makes perfect sense. It's not chaotic. It's not unexpected. It's it's not like the time I gave. Well, fortunately, it was a debit card, not a credit card. But my older son, we went to a wedding, and he's his older cousin. He'd gone out for the stag do with them, and I said, look, here's my card. Just buy all the, buy these guys drinks, because they probably bought you drinks and all that. And I said, obviously on my phone, I'm saying, ching, 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 but he's just running up the debt at the bar, because as far as he's concerned, it's free money, it's not his debt, and that, you've got that. But you've also got accidental debt, where I don't know if you've ever had that. You had that experience. So maybe you've got your mobile phone on. You fly somewhere. You get off the plane and you turn it on, and it turns out that in that country data costs like £100 per second. It's just like, oh shit, I better turn that off. And that's accidental debt. You ran it up without realising it. So sometimes debt happens. We run up the bill without realising. Oh, I didn't realise it cost that much. Sometimes we're running it up because it's free money, because it has no consequence to us, and so on. And I'm going to make a small confession. My ability to actually manage real debt is terrible. When I was at university, I was paying one credit card off with the other credit card. Don't do this, kids. Do not do this. Do not do this. Okay. And that is absolutely disastrous. But it's also the way that many organisations are running. They don't have a good relationship with debt. So that's the negative one. So we've seen that debt covers a multitude of things. So when somebody says, we've got technical debt, I don't know what they're I know what they're probably saying, but I want them to say it. That's the point, is it managed or is it not managed? Because when you say it out loud, our tech debt is unmanaged, it's just like, that sounds like you need to manage it. It's very obvious when you say it. And I think that's a case of redirecting. It's like, how do we work in a way that is allowing us to manage it, to meet our objectives? Because if we're not managing that, then that's the reason that's causing us time pressures, because we're always fighting against it. We're always having to, and that's the point. Is product, from a product management perspective, we want this feature, and you're focused on the features. But the point is, there's a whole load of stuff that and the point I made in the talk was like, features are made of software.
Yeah.
Features are technical work. There's
Yeah.
no trade-off between there's feature work and there's technical work. It's not that. There's technical work and there's feature work as a subset of that. These are not two different camps.
Yeah.
There's a relationship between them. And then we need to acknowledge, it's like, the less I do on repayment of my tech. In fact, I used Yvonne Lamb's, one of my favourite alternative metaphors. She talked about housework.
Yeah.
And the idea of housework. If I don't keep the kitchen clear, then the next time I try and, she's talking about if the next time I need a clean plate, there isn't a clean plate. So now, what I was hoping to do is I want to cook a meal, but now I've got to go and find the plates, and then I've got to clean them and all the rest of it. Now, that's not cooking the meal, that's doing all the extra work. So, in other words, how long is it going to take you to prepare this? Oh, this will take me half an hour. Actually, no, it won't, because I've got to wade through all the stuff that's piled up in the kitchen, then I've got to clean this stuff, and then, so actually my half hour turns into an hour, and it's fairly chaotic, and then we recreate exactly the same problem we started with.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's this hidden thing, and so for me, a lot of this, and I guess that's part of the point of the talk, is to see this in these invisible things, these things we don't acknowledge, and that's a really important point.
We know about it, but we just keep it at the back
Exactly.
of our minds.
Exactly,
Like,
yeah. Sometimes we don't have a name for it. Sometimes we don't acknowledge it for what it is. Sometimes it's at the edge of our vision, or sometimes we without meaning to, because people aren't talking about it.
Exactly.
It's just like, well, clearly it's not important because otherwise they'd be talking about it, right?
Yeah.
And actually, that's not the way that people work. We're very strange creatures, and we need to acknowledge that, and sometimes direct our own attention to something else.
Can I just say, in my own experience, I also feel like tech debt, for example, is kind of shied away from being talked about because it tends to be expensive.
Yes.
Like, you have to take away time from, as a product manager,
Yeah.
managing people that are building features to make an impact, to doing something that the business doesn't see as making an impact.
Yeah.
The problem is, in the long run, piling up that tech debt gives you more work, because as you're building up more features, you're actually causing more tech debt.
Yeah.
And they feel like, because as a business, we're not seeing the physical or like monetary business value impact that tech debt, we don't want to talk about it.
Because I think you're right. Because although we use the debt metaphor, it's not actually a financial debt that's easily quantifiable. And that's the point. It is a metaphor, and there is an invisibility to it. But again, all these other metaphors that suggest the busy work that we don't see. Housework is a perfect example. Okay, people don't get paid to do housework, but it needs to happen. So the point is that's invisible work. Okay, and sometimes that gets a portion to roll. There's a whole history of power structure and all the rest of it.
But it's related. It's work that's not acknowledged. But there's also other things. The building up of incidental costs. If I don't look after I have to. Our car goes in for a yearly service.
Yeah.
Okay. Our car needs an MOT, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it turns out that sometimes they say you might want to replace the tread on the tyres is looking kind of bad. And the point is there. It's just like, okay, can I afford it this year or next year? And that's the point. Is all of these things. You think of the running of the car as just like, oh, I get in it and I need to feed it petrol, or I can and these days another option is I can just plug it in and that's good. But the point there is you're thinking of it from that point of view. It's like, no, there's other upkeep things, and then there's all the surprises.
Exactly.
The surprises, those are the ones just like, the car does not work today. The car did not start. The car has started making a funny noise. and
Just turn off the volume.
That's right. And actually, it's really, that you said that is really important, because that's what a lot of organisations do. It's like, they turn down the volume. And I genuinely know of one organisation where actually that's what came from the management team. They said, oh, we don't want to hear bad. In fact, that's the reason they didn't want to hear sprint-based development. We don't want to hear bad news every 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
What do you want? Let's package it up every 6 months and give you really big bad news. I mean, just the point is that this is happening, and it's a case of valuing it and quantifying it. And sometimes things, the danger is that we end up just quantifying the things that we can see, and that's do you know the lamppost problem?
No,
The lamppost. Right. Okay. So it's sometimes described like this. So this guy's walking home, and it's late at night. It's dark, and he sees this other guy who's clearly very drunk. Look under a lamppost, looking around, and the guy says, "What's wrong?" He says, "I've lost my keys." Oh, okay. Let me help let me help you. And he searches, after nearly half an hour, it's just like, I can't find, are you sure you lost it here? And the guy says, oh no, I lost it over there, but the light's over here. And that's the way that most organisations measure.
Yeah.
That's easy to measure, that's easy to quantify, so we'll focus on that and manage through that. And it turns out that a lot of software development and a lot of the artefacts of software architecture are difficult to visualize. They're almost invisible. They fall outside the easy, and so therefore they focus on the easy. And and that's the point I want to say is that as you're pointing out, so like this so often happens that you gravitate towards the things that are easy to quantify, the things that are easy to see and talk about, and those things that you can't talk about. There's kind of a bit in your head that people don't really realise that they're doing this, but it's this kind of psychological. It's just like, well, the things that are difficult are obviously not, or the things that I can't talk about are obviously not worth talking about, rather than they probably are worth talking about because I can't talk about them. How do we quantify that? Maybe it's not easy. Maybe that's the whole point. Maybe that's why we're having these invisible struggles. Yeah.
Wow. I love talking to people like you because obviously I'm a software developer as well, and I feel like with software developers that started with computer science in the 90s, they have so much experience and knowledge because you guys had to like read, sometimes even code on paper. I mean, she was talking about clean code. That's after school, that's probably the only book I've read as a software engineer. So, and the rest is docs. And I don't know anything other thing I get, and using AI, which is now what it is now. So, first of all, what do you think about the contrast between these two periods? And now, we attended an event where somebody was talking about AI, and then they were talking about how it's separating like generalists and specialists. So, what's your viewpoint on that as well? Do you think we'll be able to develop specialists like you in this generation?
I think that's a really interesting.
And is that a problem?
I think there are a number of opportunities, which is code word for saying there are also going to be a number of problems. Whenever anybody says there's going to be opportunities, that's code for let's talk about the things you can't see. Actually, there's going to be a number of problems, and okay, software development is changing, and there is an emphasis on the AI assisted. So let's just focus down on the AI assisted aspect of that. And the point that people need to be very careful is, first of all, the assisted aspect. I find that it's useful. So that every now and then I'm just sitting there going like, okay, I need a breakdown of this topic. I'll go and ask ChatGPT. It's just like, give me a breakdown of this topic. But I use that because I think, okay, that's kind of interesting. But I push back. I push back. It's just like, I'm not sure that that's the case, or could you give me more detail of that? Okay, I'll try compiling that. That's actually not working. And just in terms of a breakdown, I will use it as I approach it with skepticism. Which is not, to me, it's not the same as cynicism. I'm approaching it with skepticism. In other words, okay, you're telling me this, but let me go find out. And I will do things like, okay, do you have a citation for that, or where can I will pick up on specific terms, and then I will go and say I will Google those. So in other words, I'm trying to get a 360 view. So I'm using ChatGPT and other tools, but here in more conversational mode, I typically use ChatGPT. I am using it as my starting point. Give me a summary of this, but I'm not. That's not the end of it. That's the beginning of it. And then I'm going to go and dig around and see what else is said, because I also want that triangulation. The whole thing is like, we've got, if you've got two functioning eyes, that's awesome, because that, even if they're not functioning that well, all of us have got correct. Mine's contact lenses. We have all got corrective vision. Okay, let's just pretend that we've all got something corrected. Glasses are kind of. But let's just leave that bit aside. Okay, two functioning eyes. And why is that important? Because it allows you to get depth. You're seeing something from more than one angle. And that allows your brain to go, oh, okay, that's probably this distance from you, and it's kind of this shape. You're getting a sense of, whereas a flat view is a view, but you don't necessarily get the depth, or it might be an illusion. and you're more easily deceived.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the point is, I use a lot of these things as kind of triangulation. It's just like, okay, let me just kind of. So therefore, I am using AI from that point of view. It's like, okay, show me this. Okay, now I'm going to go and have a look elsewhere, outside this context. You're not, I'm not going to take this as the voice of truth.
Yeah.
It's like you give me a starting point, and often very, very good. But I also want to check, because we know that there are odd hallucinations. I had an AI summary this week. It was I won't it was a citation site that offered me an automatic review of one of the books that I edited.
Ooh.
97 Things Every Programmer Should Know. And it was here's an AI review of it. And they were really useful. They didn't tell me which AI engine they were using, but and so I thought, oh, this is interesting. So I kind of left that to a point in the week where I could actually sit down and read through it, and it was kind of interesting. Okay, general points, the English is great, really well structured, all the rest of it, yeah, beautiful. Okay, one of the first things I did is I jumped to the reference section. Almost none of the references were relevant.
Wow.
Here are things that might help you, or relevant reading. It's like, they're about software, but they're not really relevant. One of them was the book itself, and it didn't realise it was referring to the book it was reviewing. One of them was completely hallucinated, did not exist. I know because I wrote it, or rather I didn't write it. And some of the bits and pieces, like the DOI references, were totally made up, but not bad compared to what the references you got generated, say, a year ago. So we can see some improvement there, but still, it's not all real. Yeah. And because I looked at some of these things, and I went through and I checked, and some of them I already knew, others I just read the abstract of, and it's just like, that's not really relevant. Okay, and so and then it was interesting, kind of going through it and just seeing what it said and where it got things right and wrong. So not bad, but I wouldn't want to use that as the sole source. And the explanation with too many words as well, or rather, sorry, the review too many words. It was half of it was ego stroking. It's just, look, you're a machine, I'm a human. I don't need you to stroke my ego. It's nice if another human being pays me compliments, but but most of it was generated because it didn't actually have anything to say. So you could cut it by half. If you had to, you cut it by half. So the point there is a lot of the answers that you get, go and cross-check them, because and the very act of cross-checking them, you've heard that phrase when people talk about, when it comes down to code as well, you need to be the human in the loop. You need to keep a human in the loop.
True.
All the rest of it. And I've become really interested with this kind of phrasing. Like, what does it take to be a good human in the loop? We say it like it's obvious, but I don't think it is. And that's the whole thing, is I'm using, when I'm using AI, I'm using it to kind of like, okay, make me go and look for something else, or give me starting points, and now I'm going to come back, and if I'm able to criticise or build on the knowledge that it's got there and go, oh, that was good, or that's not complete, or that's not quite right, or here's a better, that means I now understood it. It's not just passing through me back to the keyboard. It's genuinely sticking in there. It's not just. It's got resonance in that. So I think that therefore I'm not going to outright say good things and bad things about the technology. It's a case of how are people going to approach it, and that's the bit that we can learn differently.
Exactly.
Honestly, if I had that kind of, to make myself really old, I started before there was an internet. Or rather, before there was a web. The internet's been around for a long time, but before there was a web. The web is one of the single most useful resources for software developers ever created. A combination of the web and the open source culture. And even the benefit of that is that even things that are not open source, people are sharing information online. If you have a problem or you want to learn something,
just go there.
In the forget the AI stuff, the transition from you only got the docs that are physically available to you to you've got the world wide. You've got other things that other people can do that. You've got Usenet, you can go and ask questions. That is a huge day and night difference in development. And the point there is, then that comes down to how do you use it? Because sometimes what we find is that sometimes people don't use it. I've had people often ask me questions that it's just like, you could kind of just Google that. And so therefore it turns out that using a search engine is a skill. Guess what? using an LLM is also
It's a skill, yeah.
So therefore, so the question is, you've got this thing that not only can you do searches through, you can actually have dialogue. You can ask it for arbitrary summaries. You can say, "Hey, give me a summary." That's fantastic. The question is not can you do that, how are you responding to that? How are you using that?
Exactly.
When you're asking for solutions, particularly when you've got a code option, it's helping you code. Why are we only asking for one solution? We've just eliminated the cost of variation. This is fantastic. So there's this saying from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, translated into English, is there's nothing more dangerous than an idea when you have only one idea. And it's just like, that's a good lesson for life. But it's really interesting because in software and in the creation of any kind of product, there's many possibilities, and we always have to narrow down to one.
Of course.
But what if I told you that you
And
could
the
generate?
cheapest one.
Yeah, often, yeah, exactly. But what if I told you that many of you can now explore different options, almost for free, and then you look at what people are doing, it's just like, oh, you're not exploring that for free. You're not taking advantage of the very fact that here is something that could, for the same effort as I can ask it a question, and I can ask for a solution, I can ask it for 3 solutions.
Yes.
I can ask it for generating variations.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, that's kind of cool, and I don't see many people doing that.
Doing
So in
that,
other words,
yeah.
again, it's a bit like the search. How do you use search engines effectively? So for me, that's going to be the differentiator. I think that's the real difference, and that goes back to. So let's get back to your question. It's like, are we going to end up with people? I think people still do read books, but most people digest things in shorter formats.
True.
And they create their own network. A book is somebody giving you a network. Here's a bunch of ideas. I'm going to lay it out in linear style, and there's an index. And they're trying to create something from their mind that is intensely interconnected and messy, and they're trying to flatten it into a linear format. And that's the art of storytelling.
True.
But here you're offering people the ability to create their own structure, but many people don't take that invitation. Here are all the tools that can allow you to create something that's actually richer than an individual book. But at the same time, I also say that sometimes the benefit of a book is also, it might not necessarily be as rich, but you get a coherent view. You get one person's view. You get one person's voice. That can be valuable, and I don't think we want to lose that. But at the same time, in terms of just pure knowledge and knowledge work, there is a great potential. I mean, we can just leave it at the search engine, but AI just as a layer on top of that, it's just like there are all these possibilities, and I don't think people are taking them, and they're not making themselves more human through it. They're making themselves servants of the machine. And at this point, we kind of skew to Terminator and Matrix and all the rest of it. But the point there is that you've got that. There's a set of possibilities. Now, whenever anybody says these are possible, that doesn't mean it's inevitable. It's just somebody's laying these out. You could have these, but
these are options.
These are options, and most people are normally taking. Guess what? The easiest one. How do people use search engines? Normally, it's the top 3.
Of course.
They very rarely get to the second page, third page, whatever. And that's the point. It's like when we think about what's involved in a search engine, that's actually quite cool as well. I think we got so glib about it, we forget how cool a technology that is.
Because there's so many layers of technology coming.
There are.
So people are losing sight of the foundations of a lot of things.
The art of researching stuff,
so
deeply researching
so the
stuff.
quality of a lot of things are becoming less and less.
No, that's right. You said the quality of research, and that's the interesting thing is that the for many people it's becoming shallower. With the very tool that allows them to go deeper. There's a paradox here. So some people. So in other words, here's something that can allow you to do anything, and people are not. They can allow you to do the research more. To get even better triangulation.
But
we're not using that in that way. Or rather, when I say I'm making it sound like everybody's the same, they're not. There's a minority, relative minority, people who go, oh, I understand how to play this game. And that's the thing. And for those people who are doing that, they have a huge advantage. Now, for everybody else, I think there's the danger that what they do is they favour expediency and short-term turnaround. And that's, guess what, that's what we measure. They don't measure the fact that sometimes they're causing themselves other problems. Particularly they don't understand what they've built, but now there's data where we're saying, interesting data on GitHub from a company called Gitclear that's been tracking code quality over the last few years. And since the AI era, code quality's dropped.
Ooh.
And it's just like, but the rate of creating code has increased, but the quality has dropped. And it's just like, if so there's a phrase that I coined in the late 1990s that kind of had some popularity in the 2000s, which was so I'm bringing it back at the moment. Typing is not the bottleneck in software development, and the reason I would say that is because sometimes people respond as if that's the thing that's slowing us down. It's just like, honestly, if that were actually the problem, we just teach everybody to touch type and we've solved productivity. Exactly. But that's not the problem. It's this bit, and what is it? The hard questions. What are we trying to build? What's the best way to build it? How do we experiment and evolve this? Sure. What techniques do I not know that I can bring to bear on it? How do I take advantage of other people's knowledge?
Yeah.
Well, these are the hard questions.
Yeah.
That's the bit. And sure, there's some code. But it turns out that that's, and I have to type it, but typing, what is the overall architecture of this thing? What is the conceptual idea that if for a product, what is its conceptual integrity, to borrow a term from Fred Brooks? Sure. These ideas, these are the things that you're after. And it's not a typing contest. That was partly in response to certain frameworks and code generation of the period. But it's worth bringing back now because although, yes, AI can generate a lot of code, it can do it fast, that's never been, the amount of code has never been the problem. It's what is it supposed to do and what's the right option here and how do we build something. More importantly, it's interesting you mentioned products versus projects. How do we build a product? Products and projects are played by different rules, and a project has an end state. A product, the goal of a product is to keep on going. It's not to finish. I mean, we know that in the universe that things are finite, sure, but the idea is you want to. Not only do you want to release the next version of the product, you want to have the version after it, the version after that.
Yeah.
The goal of the game is to keep on playing. It's not to finish playing. It's to keep on playing, and that invites us a really different mindset. And now I'd say we have all the tools, but I don't think we're applying them well, or we're measuring or rewarding the wrong behaviours. And I think that's the issue that we're confronting. Is it's knowledge work. We have all this knowledge on tap, and we have some amazing tools. It turns out it's not the tools. It all comes back to the harder questions.
Sure. That's amazing.
Yeah. One final question I have for you is, the talk you gave today, what is one key message that you hope that you've left with your attendees, basically? Yeah,
so because I can't remember, we mentioned the talk already, but the case for technical excellence, that was the title.
Yes,
and so I'm trying to make the case that this matters and that it's a business positive thing to do. That there's a false trade-off when we talk about prioritizing feature work over technical work, and that's what I want to leave people with. That idea is that is when you're dealing with software products, feature work is technical work. Features are made of software. It's all technical work. There is technical work that you can see and there's technical work that you can't see. There's feature work that is obvious and manifests itself, for example, in a user interface. And there's the underpinnings of feature work. We're in a building right now. I can't see it, but I'm pretty sure this building has a foundation. I really hope it has a foundation.
It has plumbing.
It's got all of this stuff. Now, the reason I say I believe there is a foundation is because that's building regulations. The point is that's not a thing you have to ask for. You don't say, oh, by the way, we want the executive suite for AFC Bournemouth. We want all of this stuff. And by the way, we don't want it to fall down. Nobody ever actually states that as a requirement. It's kind of assumed, and so therefore the architects and the construction company. There's a kind of there's a whole set of best practices that we follow to make sure that buildings don't fall down, that they are resilient against the weather and so on. And so there's a whole load of assumed things, and that's part of the assumed conversation for building. It's not really part of the assumed conversation for software. And so therefore we end up with this, if somebody sort of looked at that and said, oh, I see you've got a foundation on that, but nobody's ever going to see that, so maybe we don't do that. It's just like, and you've got all these load-bearing walls. Well, those seem to use more material, and we don't need that. It's just like, these are the things that underpin the building. You see the building, and that's the point, is the user experiences the features, but they don't. There's a whole load of stuff that underpins those, and we have not made that a normal part of the conversation. That's why I want to leave people with that idea.
Amazing. Anyway, we have just a few minutes to close this
For
session.
the break.
So I'm going to ask you one last question away from all the technical stuff. What does Kevlin Henney love to do on his downtime?
First of all, Kevin Henney has to have some downtime. Actually, no, I do have some downtime coming up. Right, so what do I like to do? So I mentioned a couple of things.
Yeah.
A couple of things. One of them I mentioned in this podcast. I mentioned that I write articles. Well,
Yeah.
I'm still writing, but I started writing short stories a number of years ago. So I write flash fiction. I also do performance of. So flash fiction is really short stories, like 500 words.
Okay.
And so I've had a couple of stories recently published. I like to write. Next week I'm also doing a spoken word performance of one of my stories. So really so I like getting fiction. I made a throwaway remark in my talk about guitars. I like playing guitar.
That's great.
That's I'm not going to say I'm any good at it, but I like it. I'm good.
That's cool.
I'm at a level where I think, oh, this is enjoyable. I get enough enjoyment out of it, and I'm not going to pretend to be a rock star. That's absolutely fine. But it's enjoyable. I like the whole process. And I also mentioned, there's stuff about I like photography, street photography.
Oh yeah, your what's it called now? The image used for the event you had.
Oh yeah,
that's right. Yes,
yeah,
I did. Yeah. So I enjoy photography.
Can you tell us why it's important that even as a technical person, you need to have, like, if you have a creative side, you need to explore that?
I cannot play mixed.
I mean, you play the guitar, you indulge in photography, you write, fiction stories, all of that.
Okay, I'm going to confess. Half of that is midlife crisis. So if you're young, feel free to skip that for the next few years. But half of that is midlife crisis. But more seriously, sometimes as a kid. So I said I took kind of a science view. When I was a teenager, I also wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a science fiction writer. I wanted to work in movie special effects. I had all kinds of So in other words, those sides I used to draw a lot, and it was only having kids that got me kind of back into drawing. The drawing's lapsed, but I think creativity is software development. Why is it important? If you first of all, it's just good to do something different. It's good to have a different. So one of the things particularly during the pandemic that I found is that. Because we all spent a lot of time on screens. Playing the guitar was one of the few things that I did that did not involve a computer screen. It got me into a different room. So then you've got stuff like that. Photography for me is just pausing. It's an opportunity to stop, but also to look at the world differently. And I learned a lot through a couple of photography challenges about learning to frame things, because it causes you to see things differently. And I find that's valuable. The stuff we do in software, the words matter. And for me, that manifests itself also in writing. So I think it's that it makes you, it allows you to do other things. It makes the world. It also allows you to connect to software from a different. And that's the thing. You don't want everybody in the software space to be the same. You don't want the same demographic. You want, software is a complex thing. You don't want everybody to think the same. You want everybody to think differently. You want people with different backgrounds and different attitudes and so on. So you need to have that. It also is really interesting because it gets you into different spaces and different conversations. You end up falling into. So let me a very simple example. Software development, it's kind of male dominated. Okay.
It is.
Okay. So it's a case of there's a disproportionate number. Let's talk about guitar. That's makes software development look positively egalitarian. I jam with some folks. We do a lot of rock stuff. The rock space is rock, blues rock, pop. There's a lot of blokes. Particularly when it's around guitar. Okay, let's talk about writing. When I go to a writing event, I'm the minority gender.
Oh.
So it's kind of, that's a good inversion. It's just like go somewhere where there's people who are not like you. Experience that, understand. So I go there and it's just like, oh, that's different.
That's different.
And so, but demographically, it's majority women, but often they're my age. If I play guitar, majority male, but they're a different generation. So I'm hanging out with people who aren't my generation, who don't think and listen to the same music that I do. So I pick up new music. So the point is, all of these spaces, they offer you different insights and different perspectives. You build a fuller view of the world. Now, if software is about trying to model the world and build things in the world, then I'm going to say, honestly, even looking from that point of view, I've already made the case. You're not making the case.
Do you have one last thing to say?
No.
Right.
I actually just wanted to say that the way software development is dominated by male, product management is dominated by females. I think.
Yes. And that's the interesting thing, is that if you get a company together, sometimes the gender balance looks just right, and then you go, let's separate out the departments. Okay, I get it. And that's the important thing. It's not looking at whether something's right or wrong in that sense. We can also do that and say, how do we want to change it? But it's also, okay, what's the experience like of being there? What's the experience like of being there? You know, it's just like, and that applies to a whole load of stuff. And that's what you want to build anything that you're doing. But it also sparks ideas.
True.
You know, you have different conversations.
Great. I mean, so you heard it right from Kevlin, and that's why I think we started to do this, because like she said, she's a project manager, I'm a software developer, and we don't want to go to the office every day, just sit on a screen. You want to, explore your creative side. Yeah, that's why we started the podcast.
This is a really good song.
It's really cool. So that's our session done with Kevlin Henney. We have another session coming up. If you go on our YouTube channel, you'd see Reconnect, the session 2. So we'll be starting that at 12 o'clock. Guys, make sure to join. And do you have anything to say?
No,
make sure to subscribe, make sure to like everything.
That's been great.
Thank you very much,
I really
Kenny, for
enjoyed
coming.
it.
Really fun talking with you. All right, guys, we'll catch you on the next session. Bye.